Hey everybody, Tim Kawakami here, 49ers Plus Minus with my co-host, the one and the only Matt Barrows. By the way, we're going to talk a lot about rest disadvantage. I'm pretty sure I got the greatest rest disadvantage of all time. I was at the Giants-Dodgers game last night, riding late into the night. We were recording this early on the next morning, but you know what? I don't care. That's what the schedule says. We've laid out everything. I'm just going to show up powerfully and ready to go. I don't care that I got 5 hours of sleep. I don't care, Barrows. You're rested. I'm ready to go.
You seem sharp. I mean, sometimes too much rest is bad. I mean, like I got a full 9.5 last night, and I'm still sort of waking up right now. So,
can we just do this a little bit later? No, I have my cup of coffee in me. I didn't go for 2. I just feel just fine. I might be taking a nap later today, but I knew we had this. I had to be the best I can be for Barrows, or else Barrows is going to slay me, and I just don't want that to happen. So here we go. 49ers. The NFL schedule came out last night. Obviously, there would be drips and drabs that were leaked out throughout the early parts of the week. Got the full 49ers schedule. I didn't see it right away. People let me know there are 4 games where they're playing an opponent that is coming off a bye. That is not great. It's the most in the NFL. I just looked at it. I didn't see as many problematic spots. Maybe I should have looked harder again. I was at the Giants-Dodgers game. I will mention that many other times. I don't know. Did it strike you as worse, same, easier than last? And we'll say we know last season was a hard schedule. That was a tough one. This season with the 9 home games and the 8 road flip from, and they do that every other year. They had 8 home games and 9 road games last season. Did you see any problem areas that maybe could have been avoided? Points where the 49ers and their fans could complain about this year's schedule?
Yeah, and I guess a lot of teams would have this complaint this year because it's a year where the NFC West is playing the AFC East, so you've got a lot of travel happening. New England's going long distance, Miami's going long distances to the West Coast a couple of times for both of those teams. And 49ers play 2 Florida teams. They would like to stay in Florida between those games. They're nowhere near each other. So the NFL, I mean, I realize how difficult this is, but they didn't go out of their way to give a lot of these teams sort of back-to-back games on these long flights that they're taking. So they go to Tampa Bay right after the bye, and then they go to Miami. Is it the second to last game of the year? I forget.
Third to last.
Third to last. So, yeah. December 22. So they don't get to do that stayover. And the other thing that jumped out to me is the week 12-13 sequence, which is at Green Bay. Difficult place to get to. This is more for the reporters.
Yeah, it's more for Barrows, by the way. This is the Barrows
complaint. But I mean, you're playing in Green Bay in late November, and then you come back, and then you have to get back on a plane and play at Buffalo on December 1st. Those are 2 playoff teams, 2 tough places to play. That's a difficult stretch.
And Thanksgiving is right in the middle of
that. Right. By the way, Thanksgiving's right in the middle. So there's no way that you're going to stay over anywhere. You're not going to go to Youngstown in between.
Yeah, they're not doing that. Yeah, they're not.
No, they're not. They basically said, no, we're not going to do any stayovers.
You know, I'd heard this before. We mentioned this, I think, before, that they'd gotten a little tired of that. I think with that one year, they did like 4 of them, whatever it was. Like, they had camp, they had this, coming off the when pandemic, where they were stuck in Arizona for a month. Like, they were just done with this. I don't think they liked the Youngstown practice situation, right? It's AstroTurf. I don't know that they're into this. Florida, they got IMG. I think they could do IMG.
Yeah,
but they don't want to do West Virginia anymore. They're not, they can't say it out loud with the owner that they've got, but I don't think they want to do Youngstown anymore. So they're flying back, and you wouldn't want the players away from home for Thanksgiving, right? You wouldn't do that. But those are 2 tough trips, no question. And maybe you just want to win one of them and then see what happens on the second one. What do you think about this playing? Once again, they're playing 4 teams that are coming off a bye going into the 4 days, 4 times. Major rest disadvantage.
Yeah, and look who those teams are. It's Kansas City, Dallas, who are just absolutely gunning for the 49ers, but can't seem to ever beat them, Seattle, and Buffalo. So, I mean, 4 teams that can really that would be the difference maybe in a game. So yeah, I mean that's a big deal. It's an advantage for that team. I'm gonna at some point, because there's so many of these games, and this is the second year in a row there are four of them. I'd like to look back. I don't know what the appropriate amount of time is, maybe the last 20 years, and see how much of an advantage it is for teams coming off rest. I know that psychologically it's got to be a big advantage, but sometimes you're coming off that bye, and you sort of need to get back into the swing of things, and
Yep.
you're a little bit stodgy coming out of the bye. So I don't know just how dramatic it is, but I know that the 49ers didn't love that last year.
Yeah, it just feels a little different because I think there's just like if you get the regular week before a team versus a bye, it shouldn't be terrible. It's when you've got a short week or it feels like you got to travel and then you've got a team on the bye. I think, or it's after a stack of games. You've just had one after the other, and then you get a rested team. We know that Cincinnati game last year, the 49ers were coming off a long stretch, and it just looked tired. I thought, right, that was before their bye.
Right.
And we don't know how it's going to play out. Some games that you think are going to be super physical, super tough are not, and some that you think are going to be cakewalks turn into be very physical games. We'll see there. I was interested that there's only two 10 a.m. games.
Yeah.
They're playing those East Coast teams, but there's only two 10 a.m. games. So many of those East Coast games are primetime games. And I was looking back, when's the last time they only had two? It was 2 years ago when they played the AFC West, right? You couldn't really get 10 a.m. starts. They had four of them last year. I think those are tough. I mean, again, if you're a 49er fan, even if you're not going to the game, you're getting up pretty early to watch those games. Your body clock is different for those games. I keep saying those are tough games. And then they got their first one is after the Monday night home game of the Jets. Then it's week 2, 10 a.m. start Minnesota.
Yeah.
That's a tough game. We'll see how good Minnesota is. That's a tough body clock football game. They don't. The only other 10 a.m. game is what? Yeah, it's
Tampa.
Tampa. Yeah, after the bye. So there's some things there that I don't think are as tough. Again, I know the 4 games against teams coming off a bye. The other thing that I was struck by, no international game. We all had a sense that they might get that Vikings game in Wembley, and they didn't get it. Any idea on that, Barrows? Are there are the 49ers? I thought ownership would probably be in favor of them playing in London at some point. So did they ask for this? I mean, I don't think Shanahan and Lynch are too big on anything other than playing at home if they can possibly do it, or playing as many normal games as possible. You think did they ask out of the international game, or is there an international game for sure coming up in the near future?
Well, in recent years, each of the teams has sort of picked a foreign country that they're going to be associated with, and you can pick multiple ones. And the UK is one of the 49ers foreign kind of partners. But Mexico is the primary one. And the issue with Mexico right now is that the major stadium in Mexico City, Azteca, is being refurbished for the World Cup. So no NFL games are going to be played there while that's going on. So I think that's why the 49ers haven't had an international game in a couple of years. I mean, I would think that they'd be in the regular Mexico rotation if everything was up to par there. But it's a good question. Okay, if Mexico's out of the rotation for a little while, why not just send some of these teams to England for those games, because the 49ers would like to. But I think that's the major reason, and I would think that right after, 2026 would be the year that they resume playing in Mexico.
When they get 9 home games and you can give up a home game for that. I can definitely see they also love playing there as the road team, right? A road game where 75% of the fans are going to be
right. Exactly. Yeah.
fans. They do love that. That was a couple years ago, and it helped. I think that was not a problem for them. This is a team that never gets asked to do hard knocks, and they would hate it, right? I've joked. You want to see Kyle Shanahan quit? You give him hard knocks camera crews following his team around the locker room.
Yeah, you'd have a joint press conference with John Lynch on that retirement announcement.
Steaming. But they don't. But they get out of that. They all this. They're adding all these in season, off season, 49ers never show up on that. They're obviously never going to volunteer to do it. They get out of this international thing, whether that's something the ownership wants. I know Kyle and John don't want it. Is it possible? Okay, you're going to get some teams coming off of buys. There's going to be some issues where we're not just going to draw it up for you, because we do know. I think the thing that's not explained often enough is teams do request this stuff, right? They have preferences for where they want the schedule to fall. They don't want 1:00 starts in September at Levi Stadium. They got one this year in the first month, New England, but that's it. It's not three of them. There are things, there are preferences, there are ways to kind of maneuver the schedule upon the request of the team, and sometimes the league pays attention to it, and sometimes it doesn't. You think is that my conspiratorial mind saying, like, listen, you don't get Hard Knocks, you got by the way, they got a Super Bowl, right? There's some things you have to give back when you get a Super Bowl. Any factors involved with that?
I mean, I see what you're saying. It probably doesn't come down to it. I think it's a pretty antiseptic process where they just have to kind of slot all these games together, and they're really beholden to the providers, the networks, and things like that. You can sort of tell this is the third year in a row, for example, the 49ers have a bye in week 9. And the second year in a row, they have that trip to Florida right afterwards. And to your earlier point, last year it was to Jacksonville in week 10. And I thought that was one of their 3 best games of the season. Like they came out, remember, they went into the bye on that 3-game skid, and they came out just firing on all cylinders, and they just throttled the Jaguars, who were good at that point. But my point is that it seems like there's a template, and maybe they're just using the previous year's template and then sort of going from there. But I think that maybe they will acquiesce to some requests, but there are just so many hurdles that have to be done for these schedule makers that you can't hit all of them. I will say that the 49ers they didn't get the back-to-back games in Florida, but both of their Florida games are after November 10. So you're not playing in Miami in September, which would be a huge change for them. That would be a real advantage for the Dolphins if a team from the West Coast had to kind of play in that humidity. So there are some advantages to the way it's set up. I mean, the bigger picture for me is that the bulk of all that travel is in the second half of the season. They go to Minnesota in the first half of the season, which is a 3-hour plane ride, but that's pretty short for the 49ers. Everything else, both Florida trips, Buffalo, Green Bay, those are all in the second half of the season.
Yeah, that could wear our team down too. We'll see. I mean, you're going to have to take these trips at some point. I mean, that's one thing you hear these complaints. Like that was on the schedule. They're going to play these games. They do have 2 Thursday night games again. That's another thing they could complain about. That's not what happens for every team in the league. Do you draw a circle around that, or is either Thursday game? It's at Seattle. It's hosting the Rams later in the season. They always seem to get that Thursday night game in Seattle now. Any thoughts on the Thursday night games?
Well, they haven't had trouble with it in recent years. Veteran team, they know how to handle it. I think that's an advantage for them. But yeah, I mean, you don't want to have 2 Thursday night games. The interesting thing about the first Thursday night game is that they host the Chiefs afterwards, and you say to yourself, wow, that's an advantage for the 49ers. They get sort of a mini bye to get ready for Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. But then again, you look and you realize, oh, the Chiefs are coming off their full bye for that week. Yep. So that sort of gets wiped away, any advantage that you got there. But I mean, I would think that at this point they sort of, not shrug, but they realize that that's part of the deal now. When you have as many stars as the 49ers do, you're going to have those Thursday night games.
And the other team is playing on short rest too. That's one thing about those Thursdays. Is not, except for when they have a bye before them. I don't know that any of these teams have a bye before they play the 49ers on Thursday. I don't think so. So you get the mini bye, right? You get the extra 2 days. So that's pretty good. I've always thought, the Cowboys and Lions always playing on Thanksgiving was a help for them, because late in the season They play the short week against a team that has short rest, and then they get the extra days for the next game. And I've always thought that was some amount of benefit, especially for the Cowboys, especially when they're really good in the 70s and the 80s, I guess, and then in the 90s again with Jimmy Johnson. It's just part of Thursday night games is you got to tough out that first one, but then you're fine. You're feeling pretty good going into the second one. 6 primetime games. That's what you imagine. This is the 49ers. This is one of the most bankable. Cowboys, Jets, 49ers get the maximum 6. This is the way it is. They're beloved in prime time. They're a big numbers team. This is the way it works for them. I think they love playing in prime time. Any of those games jump out to you?
Yeah, well, I mean, to me, one of the things that jumps out is that the news happens and you register at the time, but it's not until the schedule comes out and then the game comes around that the fact that Pete Carroll is no longer with the Seahawks really kind of sinks in. Bill Belichick, this will be the first time the 49ers play the Patriots without him. That starts to sink in. So that I think that'll be a bigger storyline when these games happen. But yeah, an entirely different Seahawks, coaching staff. I had to look it up. Mike McDonald, he was great with the Doobie Brothers. Let's see how he does with the Seattle Seahawks. So yeah, that sort of struck me. So I think that'll be interesting, and that makes Kyle Shanahan, as hard as it is to believe, one of the longest tenured head coaches in the NFL now. Once these kind of gray hairs go away, it's Shanahan starting to kind of assume that mantle.
He and McVay are, I think, tied for 4th behind Tomlin, Reed, and Harbaugh. I think they're tied for 4th. And by the way, he's getting some gray hairs. Shanahan is getting some gray hairs, so he's one of the old guys. So I talked to him at the end of last season. He's one of the establishment. He's like part of the coaching. Well, he's got all these assistants who like look up to him. He's obviously one of the establishment coaches in this league. Yeah, I'm looking at there's a few that strike me, like the Detroit Monday Night Football Week 17. Like again, we don't know what the teams are going to be like at that point. But I think we got a pretty good idea. Those are 2 really good teams. That's just kind of a showcase game. Like that could be, for the number 1 seed. That could be for home field advantage in the second round. I like that game. Putting it that late in the season.
Yeah, that was done on purpose.
Yeah, like that was like, hey, here's a pre-playoff elite team situation. We'll see where they are at that point, but. I like that one a lot. I just think that is going to feel big, and it's going to be a build up to it. We knew the Eagles regular season game last year was going to be a big game, and it was, and it kind of broke the Eagles. Not a primetime game, but felt like a primetime game. I feel like this is the game that everyone's going to be building towards. And I appreciate when the NFL sets up something like that. They don't always need to be primetime. As I always say, Fox and CBS pay a lot of money too. Like you just can't take every good game and put it in prime time. But that one I think is big. And I know the 49ers, and I know the NBC loves the 49ers. Those 2 Sunday night games at Buffalo in December, and before that, Dallas at Levi's are big games. They just love NBC, and the 49ers just seem to go well together. And I think those are large games. Any other schedule sections that you're looking at? I think the start is not great for them. I mean, Monday night game against the Jets at home, but then you have the short week. I mentioned 10 a.m. start Vikings, and then you're right at the Rams. They always get that LA game in early, it seems like. Not a real easy start to this season.
No, not at all. And I thought, to your point about the Lions, that they missed an opportunity by putting Arizona as their finale. You put the Rams there, and then you could potentially have a really compelling game in Week 18. It wasn't last year, I guess, because both teams had clinched and they started all their backups. But I imagine it could be a little bit tighter this year. The other thing that jumps out to me is look how many, you were just talking about Kyle Shanahan's coaching tree. Look how many Shanahan assistants they're playing, starting out with the Jets, lots of assistants and former players. Javon Kinlaw, Solomon Thomas stand out. In Week 1 at Miami in Week 16. That's another team that's full of ex-49ers, including Raheem Mostert. They drafted a guy this year, Isaac Guerendo, who's very Raheem Mostert-like. And then you got the Green Bay in Week 12, and that's probably the team that has the least at this point because LaFleur has been on his own for so long. But you're hitting just about all of the Shanahan coaching tree guys except for D'Amico Ryans and the Texans. Maybe they'll hit them in February.
See them. Where's the Super Bowl? New Orleans. I just saw that.
Yeah,
New
see him in
Orleans
New
Super Bowl.
Orleans.
We've done that before, Barrows. We
Oh
have
yeah.
done a New Orleans Super Bowl before. Wouldn't be terrible. Any other schedule thoughts before we move on to other stuff?
No, I think that's it. I think we covered it.
I like that I got off unfurl my conspiracy. I want the Hard Knocks thing is, as we know, it's a big deal. Like they do not want any part of Hard Knocks.
Well, I mean, if you don't want to do Hard Knocks, just make the playoffs. I mean, that's
well, they're I think they're going to change that, right? I think
Yeah.
they're changing that because it really limits them in the teams they want, and they want to make sure Hard Knocks is taken care of. And I think they really want to do the 49ers. And the 49ers, no, they're in the playoffs. My joke is if you remove that one, they might take the new coach one, just fire Shanahan and then rehire him and say he's a new coach. Because that's one way they could get it, because they do not want to do Hard Knocks.
Hard Knocks has become so watered down, too. I mean, you don't have any of the, uncomfortable, we're letting you go conversations, or not as many of those. So, I mean, it might be that the 49ers don't have as much to fear with that show as they would have 5 years ago.
I agree with that. And they got their own cameras where there's always other cameras roaming around. And it's like it isn't as intrusive as it might have felt, or immersive as it might have felt 6, 7, 14 years ago, because they're just so good at kind of limiting what they're going to see. And God knows the 49ers would limit what they say. Listen, they come to a Hard Knocks. It's going to be mostly like about the beat core, I think. Now that you could be put on camera. I have been around this, and you could film some things, and man, there would be some things coming out. People would be talking. People would be talking about that room. You had a sit down with Tariq Ahmad, the kind of the new Adam Peters. I don't know if they're going to love that terminology, but essentially taking his job is kind of running the draft scouting, kind of the administrator who collects the information, and kind of in charge of giving it to John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan. First of all, just you broke down every single draft pick. Fascinating stuff. Always great to read this stuff. I just want to ask you the big picture. Like you were around him. You were around Peters a lot. Can you compare the two? Can you give us what kind of the vibe of what Tariq Ahmad brings to the 49ers?
Yeah, I mean, I had never really met him before, so I was interested to see, what his personality was like, what his sense of humor was like, and that's all very good. I don't think he was quite as relaxed as Peters was. Might have been because I'd done that with Peters for consecutive years, and he knew what to expect. But no, I got a good impression from him. The one disappointment was that Peters would always share who their gold helmet guys were. And they aspired to draft as many of these guys as possible. And this year they've been very sort of vague about it. I think you asked right after the draft when R.J. Gillen and Ahmad came in, and they said they kind of looked at each other and said, we can't recall off the top of our heads. We'll have to go back and see. I got a similar response from Ahmad in the sit down. So I think that there has been a directive from up on high, and I don't think it's Ahmad. It might be John Lynch that said, okay, let's not reveal who our gold helmet guys are, probably because they don't want to, hurt the feelings of the guys who weren't gold helmet players, which is a sort of NFL-like theme. But I would imagine that there were some gold helmet players, and these are players. This is mostly a character driven category that the 49ers have. These are team captains. These are smart guys. These are guys that have an opportunity to transfer and they don't. Those types of things go into that. So I would imagine, if I had to guess, I would say that Malik Mustafa, their 4th round pick, the safety from Wake Forest, is my guess of if anybody got a gold helmet, this guy probably did.
Okay. What from the comments of what you thought? Anything else you learned from this conversation? Any detail that went? Okay, that was interesting. That is kind of be informative as they go into OTAs and then obviously training camp.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that you and I spent a lot of time doing in the run up to the draft was, wondering A, if they were going to draft any offensive linemen,
Mhm.
and B, kind of questioning why they've been so picky about that position or those positions over the years. And we learned a little bit more this year. There was a theme in the offensive linemen. They drafted and then they signed right after the draft. Some of these undrafted guys, including the Michigan center who's going to be in camp this year. They're all very quick, and we knew that that they valued foot speed and agility, but maybe not to the degree that I've been learning. I mean, that's like the number one criterion for these guys is that they can get off the line of scrimmage, and it's not so much 40 time. Some of these guys don't have the greatest 40 times, but getting out of your stance quickly, getting on the move quickly. That's what the zone blocking
Mhm.
scheme is all about. It's getting on a track and being able to maintain that track while a 315-pound defensive tackle is trying to knock you off that track. So you have to have the quickness to sort of get out ahead, but obviously the strength to remain steady where you're running. But bottom line is, if you can't get out quickly, you basically already lost the play, and they all have to do it in unison too. So if you're a half tick slower than the guy that's to your left and to your right, you can't run this zone running scheme, at least not to the degree that Chris Verster wants it.
Yeah, my point to be is like, isn't that what coaching's about? But I get it, like but I think Aaron Banks didn't do it his rookie season. Like, that was the problem, right? They didn't play him because he wasn't moving fast enough. He's a big dude. He's like had to figure out how to do this. I don't know what his shuttle time and all those things. Maybe he had it in him,
They weren't
but
great, no.
yeah. Yeah, but like, yeah, so take some more of those guys and coach them, right? It just seems like they do kind of turn their nose at these guys, and yet other positions, like, oh, this guy has this one thing, so we can use that and we can train it, to train him to do the other things we need. Just seems like specifically a tackle, they get really, really like, oh no, we just don't want any part of these guys. Yet you can draft somebody who's got some other talents and then coach him. Hey, it's the way they think. It just seems very particular, and like at tackle when they're going, I mean, they are going to need tackles. Like they
Yeah.
need tackles, and they just don't take them unless. Did he say anything about Pooney maybe playing tackle?
No, in fact, he was more kind of impressed that Pooney was playing center a
Mm,
lot at the Senior Bowl, which he'd done a little bit at Kansas, but they gave him extended looks at center in the Senior Bowl. So he's playing sort of a new position and going up against college all stars, and he played well. But that reassured them. I think Pooney they like Pooney as guard. I've mentioned to you before. I think that Pooney's probably going to be the new Aaron Banks at left guard coming up. But it's interesting that you mentioned Banks because you see Banks when they do gap blocking, sort of traditional power blocking. Banks is the guy that they're using. If they're pulling a guy at the goal line, it's Banks. You're following Banks into the end zone on a lot of those. So he's the most traditional of the offensive linemen that they have. Banks would work well on that famous Washington Joe Gibbs
hogs. Yeah.
offensive line in the 1980s, for example. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, he was like that when they drafted him, right? They said so. Like, he's a little different than the guys we normally draft. He's more physical, not as quick. It's worked. I mean, again, maybe they just don't want to wait the year, right? That's probably part of this. It's going to take at least a year to get this player up to speed. We don't have that time. Well, you know what? As we keep saying, if you draft him and then they would last year they would have had the guy for in the
Right.
system for a
Or,
year.
or you draft him in the first round, and then you've got
Yeah.
that extra year to
Yeah,
play with.
exactly. And it just seems like, at some point you have to invest that year. At some point you have to invest a year in a tackle where you're coaching him and then he plays for you the next year. It gets a little bit too much like short-term thinking. We need this player to produce right now at a position that you're going to desperately need in 2-3 years. So we go through that, whatever. It happens. I do want to get back to the gold helmet thing. My point on that is if you bring it up, and maybe it was Peters who brought it up, and so he's no longer there, and they don't want to talk about it. But they do like to give credit to themselves for taking these guys. That's fine. That's an interesting way to do it. I have no problem. But once you start talking about it, you can't say, "Oh, no, we're not going to tell you who they are anymore." Like that. That becomes a little problematic to me. And like, we're used to hearing your guys. This is what you do. You really love these team guys. Mike McGlinch, right? Jair Brown. There were many others. Was Hufanga. Well, you can't say, okay, we're not telling you now without us saying there's something not great about that. And we're going to point it out. At least we're going to point it out. Yeah, I think when I asked them about it, Gillen and Ahmad, it was like, yeah, of course we're gonna, we should get many of them, like multiple, yeah, and then that was it. They wouldn't say who it was. We're gonna keep asking. This is stuff that's fascinating to know. You've gotten credit for it in the past. We'd give you credit for it this time if you would just tell us who they are.
Yeah, for sure, and it speaks to what is paramount for John Lynch, which is, character and building a locker room the right way and having that tight, unified locker room, which he's done a great job of. I mean, I think that's, I think Lynch has succeeded in that endeavor. But tell us, how you get there. I mean, let us know the process, and they have in the past, and all of a sudden, to your point, they're cutting us off. So yeah, I think that's it's suspicious. I mean, I understand. I mean, all of these guys are probably gold helmet candidates. I mean, if you look down the list, nearly all of them were um, team captains, for example. So, the leadership, and you could tell this from the initial interviews that you have with this group. And I will say that it was impressive. Not just Mustafa, but Jarrett Kingston, the sixth round pick. He seems mature beyond his years. I think that he's a guy that's going to kind of stick around early on. Pooney was the same way. Renardo Green was the same way. So I think this is absolutely a theme for the 49ers. But in the past, some guys have risen above the rest, and they're not willing to kind of make that distinction this year because it reflects, it might reflect a little bit poorly on the guys who are not gold helmets. We'll call them the tarnished helmets.
The scuffed up helmets. My point is, then they got Deebo Samuel. They're quite happy to let everyone speculate that he could be traded, right? I mean, it's competition. This is what the deal is.
Yeah.
I got no problem, by the way, with them kind of dangling Ayuk and Deebo. This is contractual situations. If it gets to an issue where someone's going to offer them more than they think this player is valued to them, they're going to make the trade, and they don't mind it out there that Deebo and Ayuk could have been traded at least next season. It's competition. If you're willing to let that all happen, you can tell us who the gold helmet guys were. That's my only point on that. But yeah, and I just think the conversation's fine in a locker room. I just think, the other players probably know. Like, I mean, it's just, but we don't need to go on and on about that. Football teams do things in their ways. Competition is good. I think Shanahan loves it. He loves competition. He loves guys who love football. And this brings me up. Someone asked me, I didn't answer, but someone asked me on social media, well, why don't they just bring Trent Brown back? Right? They love the way he blocked. They had him for a season, let him go, and he might be available. And you know what? The first thing I thought him, Barrows,
culture.
Yeah, the opposite of a gold helmet guy. And yeah. I don't want to bag on Trent, but he was a guy that Shanahan and his staff had and did not like him. I'd be like, what do they do? They draft McGlinchey in the first round. And I think we asked about Trent Brown, like after they drafted McGlinchey, we'll have something on that later. And then what they do, they think they released him or he signed elsewhere. They weren't going to bring. A super talented guy, nice guy, right? I've talked to him, just not competitive, not fiery. And, maybe he doesn't play in as many games as, can just over and over. He misses games. Injuries happen. I'm not saying they're blaming him for that, but it just wasn't that guy. I mean, when you put that up on a pedestal, gold helmet guy, Trent that was not him whatsoever. And I think when we have this discussion about competitiveness, about the way they want the locker room culture to be, that would not have been it. And these guys, as you mentioned, Pooney or Kingston or Mustafa and previous guys, Jair Brown, as I mentioned, there's other guys certainly that meet that criteria. That wasn't him. And I couldn't think of a better definition of what it isn't. Sometimes it helps to find what it is. All right, Bowers, you got anything else?
Well, just to piggyback off of that, I think foot speed was probably an issue too. Another
Mhm.
theme from earlier. I wonder what Trent Brown's short shuttle time was. He's probably still running it. It was so slow.
Wow.
No, he was known for huge weight fluctuations too. So not it wasn't as professional, at least early in his career, as he could have been. But to your point, I wonder, and I'm not going to say any names, but there are some guys I sort of wonder about from that culture standpoint who haven't done as well on this team as their draft status would have suggested, and this may be their last off season with the team. That not to the degree of Trent Brown and some other guys, but it might be something for us to discuss at the end of August as well.
Yeah, I think the names have been mentioned from some fairly high draft picks who were drafted over, quite frankly. They were, whatever round they were drafted, third, fourth, and 49ers went ahead and drafted guys in the third and fourth this year, which kind of tells you about that. Listen, you can't just draft guys you love personalities. Then they don't. They say they don't. They're like, you got to draft for talent. You got to draft for guys who make plays. And sometimes you don't think they're leaders, and they come in and they are leaders. Like they just are. And like you wouldn't think that Deebo Samuel, when you talk to him, is a leader. He is a leader in that locker room. Whenever he's not a 49er, they're going to miss him in the locker room. They're going to miss him coming out of that tunnel. We got Deebo Samuel on our team. They're going to miss him when he runs over a safety and shows the team this is how we're going to play today. You wouldn't get that from us talking to him sometimes. So you never know. But I do think there's a lean towards that. There's a lean towards like the guy that just loves football, like just wants to just play. Christian McCaffrey just wants to play football. That's what he wants to do. Brandon Ayuk wants to play football. These guys are football. I mean, Fred McWarner. I mean, my God. So like you still want talent at the most. I mean, these are all incredibly talented players. I'm not saying they're not, but you want to draft for talent. You want to draft for specific skill sets, but the way you approach the game is a skill set too. The way you can kind of rally your teammates is a skill set too. So we shall see with that. It doesn't mean that you do it one way, exactly this way every single time, but I think there definitely was a lean to that this season. And durability. I mean, I don't think there's a question. Did that come up with these guys, Barrows? These guys all were pretty healthy, right, in college. And
yeah, for sure.
The 49ers have had some issues with guys they've drafted who just can't stay healthy, cannot get on the field. Javon Kinlaw, I'll mention, he had some injury questions going into the draft, and they still took him. And guess what? Injury questions throughout his NFL career so far, and now he's no longer a 49er.
Yeah, no, for sure. And a lot of these guys have played a lot of college football too.
Yep.
And some of that has to do with the pandemic and switching schools, and 5 years was the norm of college football for these guys. But it's the polar opposite of the Trey Lance syndrome, where he just didn't get a lot of college snaps. These guys have all played multiple seasons, and so it's not quarterback; it's different. But I think that lesson that they learned kind of works for just about every position.
I want to just quickly say, what do you think Jared Goff deal means for Brock Purdy? Is it a significant jump? I'm a hardliner on these quarterback numbers are not actually the numbers that are reported. It was reported like over a $50 million per year deal. I look at it, it looks like to me like a $37 million a year deal. I don't know if you have an opinion on that.
Well, the 49ers love the 37 idea. Yeah. I mean, that's what they want.
Well,
they're like, go with what Tim said. That's
when the Purdy deal's announced, it's going to be announced as a $50 million. I'm not saying it won't be announced. It'll be reported by Shefty and everybody as a $54 million or whatever. I'm almost going to give up on this. This is the way Jalen Hurts was announced as a $51 million a year deal. Purdy's is going to be announced as that. I'm just saying in actuality, it's going to be more like 44, 45, 46. But you know what? Who cares? Who really cares at this point? I don't think Goff reset anything with this deal. It's just a really good deal for him, for a guy who's not an elite quarterback, but is worth a lot to his team. I think Purdy is similar in that way. I think he's a better quarterback, has won bigger game. Well, he has won bigger games, but I don't think it's a reset.
No. I mean, to me, it's going to hinge on the 17 to 21 games that Brock Purdy plays this season. And if they're similar to the 2023 games, then yeah, I think that number is going to be out of this world. And I think it's going to be better than Jared Goff's because you're right. I mean, he's better than Goff. He does more than Goff. He's more creative than Jared Goff is. Then, have another game in which they're side by side to kind of to show that.
My spotlighted game of the year. That's
so that game that you highlighted. Yeah, there's more going on in that game than just playoff seeding. But yeah, that'll be another fun one to watch. That's probably the game I'm looking forward to the most. Game I'm looking forward to the least is Buffalo. I don't want to go to Buffalo in December.
I'm just going to be imagining you flying out there, and I'm not going to be flying out there. So I'll be happy about that. All right, Barrows. I just like the only very limited 10 a.m. games and a lot of other interesting games. That's the way I look at this. And we'll talk about it more at some future time. Maybe not next week. We'll see. We'll see if there's development. There's OTAs and things like that. We'll see. People are listening and watching this show, Barrow, so we got to give them more of it. That's just what we are. We're givers. We provide things for people.
Maybe we'll do, a special podcast where we talk about what we like to eat on the road, our favorite hotels, favorite airlines.
People do ask that. They're like, where should I? Any recommendations? Like, I don't really travel that much anymore. I go to Seattle and LA. Those are my two spots. But we'll see. We can do something like that. And we do plan to do like a call-in voicemail question and answer. We're trying to set up the line. I think there was some interest in doing that. We'll see how Barris and I do on that one. It's coming soon, ladies and gentlemen. All right, everybody. That's the show for today.